Jack to switch the button on the live stream. Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this morning's Education, Children and Young People's Executive in our new venue. So there may be some teething issues, so can I ask people to bear with us as we learn about the new venue and just make sure that we get all the technologies right on that. So if we move to apologies, I'll go to Mr. Moody. Have we got any apologies?
No, Convener, no apologies have been submitted.
Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest that anyone wishes to highlight at this time? No, thank you. Moving on to item 3, which is the minute of the Education, Children and Young People's Executive held on the 31st of January. You have the papers before you. Are we happy to agree that as an accurate minute? Is there anything that's not on the agenda that people would wish a very brief update in relation to?
Convener.
Councillor Bundy?
Yes, at the last meeting, I did raise the issue of assaults against teachers, but I do have just some questions for further clarity. Could Robert Naylor tell me if these figures are correct? For the year 21-22, were there 592 incidents of physical attacks against teachers?
Councillor Bundy, it wasn't the subject of a report, therefore people don't have a report to base any of your questions on. The minute is really for accuracy, and as that the question you asked wasn't the subject of a report on the agenda at that day, then I don't think this is appropriate.
Quite a big topic, big interest with constituents.
There may be an interest, but perhaps it's something you can take up with the director offline, because it wasn't the subject of an agenda item, and therefore we can't take further questions on that.
Okay, though I think it's appropriate for these figures to be public for public information. Thank you.
You can take that up with the director, and I'm sure he'll answer your questions. Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions, Councillor Patterson?
Thanks, Convener, and apologies if this was either affected. I was just hoping to get a quick update in regards to the Teachers' Pay Award. I constituent the way that Falkirk says in teachers' payments is slightly different from different authorities, which may be having a detrimental impact on our Teachers' Pay Award. I was just wondering if you could shed any light on that.
Again, it's not really appropriate for the minute because it wasn't the subject of an item on the agenda, but I'm sure that Mr Naylor or indeed our Colin might be able to provide information in relation to that. I don't know if there's anything you want to say at the moment, Colin, but perhaps some detail could be provided further to members on that.
I mean, maybe just to confine my comments to that we're aware of the issue and different local authorities have been able to process the pay award at different times. So the issue arises whether the back pay is paid in March or in April. I'm happy to provide further information to you after the meeting because there are some points I would need to check myself.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, in which case, if there are no other questions, we'll move on in our agenda to the rolling action log, and I'll go to Mr Moody.
Thank you, Convener. And as usual, the rolling action log is provided for members' information in relation to reports which have been requested by the Education, Children and Young People's Executive at previous meetings. The expected reporting date is provided, and the reports which have been requested for this meeting are available on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions in relation to the rolling action log? No. Okay, we're happy to agree.
There is actually.
Oh, apologies, Councillor Spears, I didn't see you.
If you could turn to page 11 regarding the summary of care inspections. The committee agreed that on a overview report on care inspectorate inspections was reported to Education and Children and Young People, but it says that there has been no inspections taking place. Can somebody further expand on that matter, please?
Okay, Sarah?
Thank you, convener. I can confirm that since the rolling action log, we now have had 2 care inspectorate inspections, and we have a report coming to this committee on the work plan for the September committee, if memory serves me right.
So this will be reported back to us because it's.
Well, absolutely. And all information is available on the care inspectorate website.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
All information about the inspections are on the care inspectorate website, and I can share that link with you after today's meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions on the rolling action log, we'll move on to our agenda proper. And the first item is the whole family wellbeing funding. And I think we've got Cathy McGarry with us this morning, and Cathy's going to take this report.
Thank you, convener. The report that's been provided gives an update to the executive of investment that's been received by Falkirk Children's Services Planning Partnership in respect of Whole Family Wellbeing Fund, referred to as WFWF. The executive is asked to note the progress associated with planning in relation to Falkirk's allocation of the fund. Apologies, the printer wasn't working this morning. Section 4 of the report provides a background to the fund, which stems from a national COVID-19 Children and Families Collective Leadership Group that was set up to respond to concerns during the pandemic. The fund is clearly linked to the ambitions of the promise, of which Whole Family Wellbeing Fund is one component. The Scottish Government's 2021 to 2022 programme for government committed to investing £500 million of whole family wellbeing funding over the lifetime of this parliamentary session. £50 million has been allocated in year 1. 32 million has been committed nationally to Children's Services Planning Partnerships, referred to as CSPPs, to build local capacity for transformational whole system change. The criteria for the fund is set to build transformational capacity, test out new approaches, and scale up existing transformative and effective approaches. CSPPs have collaborative decision-making responsibility for agreeing how the fund should be spent. And in Falkirk, the Children and Young People Strategic Leadership Group, which is chaired by a third sector senior manager, constitutes our CSPP. Moving on to section 4.7 of the report, the current position is described. In Falkirk, the CSPP has undertaken to review its governance structure to ensure that it's in keeping with the overall ambitions of the WFWF. And over the past 6 months, the CSPP has updated its terms of reference and membership and approved recruitment to a whole family wellbeing fund task force to build capacity. They've also agreed that our children's services plan for the next 3 years will reflect the vision and aims of whole family wellbeing. In addition, it started working with partners to better align local family support referral pathways, and a senior manager has been appointed from the partnership to lead on the WFWF and Falkirk and to oversee the recruitment of the task force. The senior manager will ensure a clear joined up strategy for the CSPP priorities to keep the promise. Section 4.8 of the report outlines next steps. And the first phase of work for the task force will be to undertake a diagnostic approach to understanding the whole systems of support in context of our priorities. This scoping phase will require quite a bit of time and a variety of approaches. The second phase of activities will translate what's been learnt from the initial few months into a shared purpose and vision of desired outcomes for children, young people and families. During this phase, we'll invite partners to apply for up to £20,000 per year from the fund to undertake small to medium tests of change, either by augmenting and amending existing provision or by trying out new approaches. The Scottish Government has confirmed that any unspent funds can be carried forward from year to year. So the element of time is on our side in that respect. The considerations are described in section 5 of the report. The Whole Family Wellbeing Fund does offer an opportunity for transformational change. However, the fund is only available up until 2025 to 26 financial year. And it's important that any additional capacity created by the fund is sustainable in the longer term. The CSPP is keen to take the opportunity to utilise the fund as transitional funding to test different models of family support. And in order to invest in effective models of family support, they may need to disinvest from those that are currently less effective. Whilst the Scottish Government has given a commitment to invest £500 million in the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund over the course of the parliamentary session, early indications are that year 2 funding has been baselined on year 1 allocation. There's an opportunity to capitalise on the investment in the workforce to help drive forward the broader CSPP priorities and to keep the promise. In section 6, reference is made to consultation, and integral to the workforce is a participation engagement officer who will facilitate good conversations with those who use our services, ensuring that their views, their expectations, experiences and aspirations are central to our plans going forward. Section 7 of the report considers the implications. The financial implications include that Falkirk's allocation is £923,000 in year 1. And as I've said before, this funding can be flexibly used across the 3 years of funding. And the other important thing to consider is that whilst the monies are routed through the local authority, it's the CSPP that has collective responsibility for agreeing how to spend in a way that best maximises the longer term impact of the fund. And to this end, the chair of the CSPP is responsible for reporting to government on how the fund has been spent. In section 7.4 of the report, the risks are highlighted. And as stated, the fund represents an opportunity to begin to make the transitional changes to culture, systems and practice necessary to achieve the shift from investment in intensive, reactive family support services to a more preventative approach. The principles of the fund, which are highlighted in the report, require us to take a risk-tolerant approach to family circumstances and mitigating those risks framed within a rights-respecting approach will be very important as the task force continues to progress its work. In conclusion then, Falkirk's allocation of the WFWF represents an opportunity to transform the way we deliver family support. And the sustainability of the change is crucial, so we intend to spend sufficient time in the diagnostic and scoping phases to ensure that we're focusing our resources to the best effect. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you for that, Cathy. I'll go to Councillor Colley.
I think that's me now. It was flashing a bit. I suppose not to say too much. I think that this is an excellent opportunity. I think for us really to be able to across our partners ourselves and our partners to be able to try out a range of different approaches. And I think throughout COVID, I was in discussions with Sarah Lacey. I was very impressed in the work that our staff and our staff across all partners sought to embed and develop a range of flexible approaches to try and support children and families during what was an extremely difficult time. But I think the support around the principles, and I think they're all absolutely excellent, around about empowering and building on strengths and being flexible and responsive, and building trustful and respectful relationships. I think these principles are fantastic, and I think that's having the opportunity to really look at what options might be available to be able to develop what we don't have already, but develop. Obviously, we have some of these things, but to develop and really test a range of projects, I think is a fantastic opportunity, and I really look forward to seeing more as it develops. I'm really excited to hear about it, and I'm sure the rest of the committee would be really excited to hear further reports as it comes forward of how the projects are developing. But I won't say any more than that because it's a report for noting. But I'm very happy to support the report.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. Councillor Bowes.
Can I formally second and reserve the right to come back in?
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Hannah, Councillor Steinbank and Councillor Spears.
Thank you, convener. Thank you for this report, and it is, I won't repeat everything that Fiona has just said, but I would echo it, that it is important that we have opportunities to look at different ways of doing things and making improvements. I'm interested though in 7.1, the actual amounts of money, because it says here that 923,000 is Falkirk's allocation, but the second paragraph suggests that there's some uncertainty about the actual allocation. Do we know how much is the allocation for 23-24, and if not, when are we likely to know what it is?
We were informed via a newsletter that it would be the same funding as we received for year one. So our understanding is it's that same figure for this coming year.
Which was?
923,000.
But that's the funding to be used across the 3 years.
As I was rereading that through, that is what is implied by that. That's year one.
That is year one.
Two. Well, yes. So the underspend from year one, we have been reassured, can be. So part of the fund is to appoint the task force, because of recruitment taking some time and a delay in the money and the information being available to the council as to what the allocation for Falkirk was. We were well into year one before we were able to appoint to that team.
Sure.
So we have reassurance, absolute reassurance, that that money from year one could be carried forward into year two, which will give us the opportunity to do the test of change, either the small to medium-sized tweaks to existing services, or completely trying new things in small areas.
Just so I'm sure I understand. So the 923,000 is for 23-24.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Steinbank.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, again, I'm not going to echo everything that Councillor Colley and Councillor Hannah have said, but thanks for your extensive presentation on the report. Just got a few questions in terms of clarification of the report. At 4.7, it mentions the process as a data-informed process of co-production with service users. I think my question is just, how are we going to make sure that service users are given as much information as those professionals they will be working with, and given it in a digestible fashion to ensure that the process is both data informed and co-produced? Thank you.
Absolutely, we're very keen to get that service user voice really early. So as we're appointing our staff team to the task force, we have appointed, and we're waiting to start, the participation officer, who will take a lead role in working with communities, putting together focus groups, and there has obviously been some work done with families in Falkirk by our community learning development colleagues. And we're hoping to draw on some of those families initially because they were already involved in working with us and already have a voice. It does take time to build up that trust so that people feel that it's worth their while to engage with us. So that will be a key task over the next couple of months.
Thank you. And my second question is just on the anticipated budget and funding for the Tests of Change project. The maximum amount suggested in this would be 20,000 for a certain project, and we're aiming to get 10 projects completed in this next year. Have we budgeted for £200,000, or is there a lower amount you expect to be utilised in the course of getting those Tests of Change over the line?
I would anticipate that 10 would be the absolute maximum, because one of the asks of anybody requesting money would be that kind of learning piece that would have to come out of it. So the evaluation, real clarity about what's hoped to be achieved. And as the task force will be kind of overseeing that and sense checking it, we'd have to put a limit on it. What we have also done is utilised other funding from other sources that we're looking to kind of pull into the fund. So that 10 would be the absolute maximum. I would anticipate some of them being fairly small. They may be £5,000, it might be a few £100, but to just offer that flexibility. So I think, you know, I would say that would be the maximum.
Thank you very much. My next question is on 6.3, and it's good to see that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child framework is being utilised in this project. It's something that I know matters to many young people through conversations, and they perceive as essential in all the work we do in this area. My question is just, how will this process be evaluated to guarantee ongoing compliance with the UNCRC framework?
So alongside the money, there is quite extensive self-evaluation tools, mapping tools, and overall evaluation tools that have come. This sits within the Promise, and there's a lot of work that's been done by the Promise team in providing frameworks and reporting mechanisms really about that subject. So we won't reinvent the wheel. We'll look at what comes out of the Promise, and we'll adapt it to Falkirkise it, but we're quite confident that will be part of the work going forward. We also have, as part of the task force, a project manager who will help to keep us on task with all the milestones and the objectives to make sure that we're not getting carried away.
Thank you. And just a final question. Thanks, Convener. Just on the risk tolerant approach, I understand it's required for the flexibility this is supposed to achieve, but I'm just trying to get an idea what change to practice will be occurring under a risk tolerant framework, as opposed to, for example, what you perceive as a previous frameworks or a risk averse framework. Just trying to understand what the practical changes to actually the work we're doing looks like.
I think that it wouldn't be an absolute change. I think it's a tweak and a kind of, I think what in practice, one of the kind of cultural difficulties that have been around for the front line has been that the support has been very much focused on that kind of end game when families are in crisis, when they've tried everything, when they're exhausted, and then the intervention comes in to kind of almost try and fix things when it's too late. And the principles that support this and underpin this are really about getting in earlier, recognising when the trajectory is going to go that way, and trying to kind of bridge that gap so that we are focusing at both ends. We obviously can't give up on that kind of crisis intervention, and that, but we're hoping that we anticipate that a bit more focus earlier in the kind of course of people's lives will help us to provide that. Put the scaffolding and the support in earlier so that children can remain in situations where currently we may be having to remove them.
Thank you very much. No further questions. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spears.
I must say the acoustics are particularly bad in here today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
That's great. Whole Family Wellbeing Fund. I must say at this particular time, a Whole Family Wellbeing Fund is desperately needed. I'm sure everyone will agree. Can I turn your attention to page 20 and considerations, item 5, 151. Now, am I correct? Did I hear you properly when you said that there's some £500 million for this? Is that UK-wide, Scotland-wide?
The early indication was that that was Scotland-wide, but the reality of what we currently have and are certain of having is the 923 per year for years 1 and 2.
Okay, I'll continue to ask these questions. So you're saying that this year is £50 million? Or is that over a term of the Parliament?
The understanding was that that was for the first year.
Okay, so
Scotland-wide, yes.
is that for Scotland-wide?
Scotland-wide, yes.
And Falkirk Council shares 900,023.
Yes. 923,000.
Comes down to quite small change for quite a big job, doesn't it?
Yes, it is a challenge, but it's an opportunity.
I always see things as an opportunity and not a challenge. My favourite line from a movie is life is not a series of hurdles, but a great adventure. You're not going to have a great adventure on 900,023. How do we go then to Appendix 1? How do we hope to distribute that money fairly and for those in greatest need?
I think it really goes back to that empowering approach where we need to really use the fund to work with people from where they're at, work with people's experiences and build on their strengths and the capacities of the communities, rather than taking an approach that focuses on what's wrong. We want to be looking at what's strong, and really kind of utilising the strengths in communities. It's not an easy task, and I think it's important that we spend the time at the very start ensuring that we are making absolute best use and not hurrying into things to get quick wins or to make it look good. This needs to be really beyond the surface.
So in Appendix 1, you say it's a community planning partnership. Could you expand on that? And then go on through the Champions Board. Is this some sort of a means test for families in greater need?
So the Champions Board is a group of care experienced young people who meet on a regular basis and who have a voice in terms of influencing change in the council and across the partnership.
Who are they? I've never heard of them before.
But they are represented at this in this committee. They have attended. I think we have somebody attending on who's meeting us online at the moment because she's on holiday. But I mean, they have presented to this committee before and provided updates, and we could do that again.
So you're saying they're going to make the decision who will get this financial aid?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't have. They wouldn't be part of the governance in terms of this fund, but they are a voice for care experienced young people in our communities.
Yeah, but we need to look at the end objective, which is to help these families in need.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have an appendix here that doesn't really show us how to do that.
The appendix was just to show the governance structure, really to show how the Promise Implementation Group feeds into the Strategic Leadership Group, and then how the Strategic Leadership Group reports into the Community Planning Partnership. So this is all about, this is the kind of governance structure that sits beyond the local authority and constitutes the kind of the partners. So health, police.
So you will be coming back to us with a structure that shows us how this has been distributed and how it's been fairly distributed to the families in the most need.
Cathy, in an effort to try and move us on a little bit, this isn't necessarily direct money to the families, it's more by way of service.
Yeah.
So it's a service that would be provided to support families rather than actually giving money to them. So I don't know whether that maybe clarifies things for you, Councillor Spears.
Well, I think we need to elaborate on exactly what the service entails.
Well, that's just the presentation that Cathy has just given. Sarah, do you want to?
Happy to convener. Councillor Spears, if it's helpful to think about the structure mainly sitting within the Children's Services Planning Partnership. So fundamentally, Cathy is the senior lead for the WFWF fund and the senior lead of the task force that's being developed. And that group reports into the Children's Service Planning Partnership that sits under the Community Planning Partnership Board. So our ongoing reporting around this actual piece of work will go into the Community Planning Partnership Board. The report has come here today because of its significant linkage with communities, children and their families in Falkirk. So it's here for your information.
Us as humble elected members really want to know the benefit for the community that's going to come out of it.
I think that there's a test of change going on just now, and we need to allow that development work to be done. But there will be a further report. We'll come back on the progress at an appropriate time when some of that work has been carried out, in order to give an overview of how the services are going to be taken forward.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to scrutinising that.
Okay, I've got a number of members, but just before we move on and bring in other questions, I was just going to ask a wee bit around the transition, Cathy, around how we're going to move from being the reactive to that preventative, and also about taking staff with us, because I think that's really important, because this is going to be quite a significant change for them, and hopefully it'll be a positive change because of the nature of the types of services we want to get to. So I just wonder if you'd maybe say a wee bit around that.
Absolutely, and then there are significant challenges around staff capacity. I think that one of the really important things, as well as the service user engagement, is that wider stakeholder engagement, of which the workforce are a really key element. There's a lot of expertise in the workforce in Falkirk, and that's both our own council employees, but also across the third sector partnership. We do also have the promise, which really gives a really clear commitment that's based on very wide consultation with care experienced young people in the workforce across Scotland. So we do really have I think that there's a sense of kind of this riding on a pre-existing wave. I think that the workforce are very ready for change for the better, and I think that this is seen locally as a real opportunity. The task force themselves provide capacity in terms of really scrutinising what is going on and what we can do better, and having the kind of time and space to think of imaginative ways of doing things differently. So I think it will take time, and again, those kind of early conversations and that trust building is, like I say, isn't just the community and those who use the services, but also those who are involved in delivering them.
Okay, thank you, Cathy. Okay, I've got Michael Rollo, Alan Nimmo, James Kerr and Laura Murtagh. So we'll take folks in that order. Michael.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the report. Just one question on 4.8, bottom of page 19. The second phase of activity will translate the insights gained in the initial few months into a shared purpose and vision of desired outcomes for children, young people and families. I wondered what that meant, because my kind of mind would think the vision would come first. Is the vision the scope, and then find out what's going on, and then from that a vision will arise? Is that because my experience of working with committees is when it's shared, when sometimes, and particularly ones that I've been involved in that have been in the community, is to get a shared purpose is sometimes very difficult at the end of it, because people come with all kinds of different agendas. So I'll usually think it's better to have the vision at the start what we're all buying into, and then work out the vision in a strategic way. But you're going to get the vision from doing the consultation. Is that my understanding correct?
Your understanding is correct, and this is really based on a different way of working, which is based on the principles of service design, which is very much about really opening the scope of that exploration and being curious and being open to what might come from it. So rather than me as the kind of lead officer for the task force telling everybody what we're going to do, we have to suspend some of that stuff. I've worked for Children's Services for a very long time, and it would be easy for me to say what I think the solutions are, but I need to put that to one side and be open to other ideas and other thoughts. The other bit that's very, very important in this is that sort of broad data gathering, looking at data, looking at existing outcomes, looking at where we're outliers in terms of other local authority areas, looking at where we might be doing things really well and looking at where our outcomes may be poorer, and focusing on potentially different, might be different wards, or it might be different age groups of children, where we really need to make sure that we're having the best impact. So we need to put that data beside the lived experiences and the stories that people are telling us, and try to make sense of that in a way that then can be articulated and shared with the wider community. So although we have the sort of broad aims, which are about improving outcomes, reducing the number of children who are looked after away from home is one of the broad outcomes of this. But within that, we will have different aims and opportunities that will become clearer as we move on. So it is a real challenge, because even in writing this report, I think every single person who's looked at it has had an opinion about what should and shouldn't be in it. And I've been holding the line and saying, we don't know yet. We don't know yet, guys. We will need the people, we need the task force, and we need to start talking to the people, and then we'll come back and tell you. So it is a different way of working, and that's really why it's transformational.
And I'm all for collaboration and that, but I've been in committees where people just go round and round in circles to really don't know why they exist. There is a national framework, but they're then going to try and work out what their values are, because their shared becomes massive. So that's why I was asking that question. But thank you. It's not going to be easy.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Councillor Nimmo.
Yep, thanks, Convener. I just have a couple of questions, and it's relation to the structure detailed in the report. In Falkirk, it's the Strategic Leadership Group that's been tasked with the responsibility to take this forward. Who is the current chair of this group? I note from the report that it's a third sector senior manager, but there's not any further details. And who else actually sits on this group?
So the group is chaired by a senior manager from Aberlour, who's one of our partnership who delivers. Aberlour deliver a number of services across Falkirk and nationally, and within the leadership group we have representation from across the partnership. So we have senior police, health, children's services, both social work and education. We have Skills Development Scotland, and we have third sector. Just thinking whether I've missed anybody out. Oh, fire and rescue, emergency services. So we have representation. We could provide, we do have the kind of terms of reference available if people are interested in that.
Right, what elected members currently sit on it?
There aren't any elected members on it.
Is there scope for elected members to be involved?
No. Structure. No. Are you able to?
I don't know enough about the group, Convener, to comment on it in detail, but from the description it appears to be an operational management group rather than one which would be apt or suitable for elected member representation.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Colin. My last question, it's in relation to the collaborative decision making process that's detailed in the report as well. I take it any decisions that are taken by this group would have to come to this executive for to be ratified. Is that correct?
No. No, it's the Community Planning Partnership that would be overseeing that group.
Right, so we wouldn't be getting any regular reports in relation to what this organisation or this group's doing?
No, no.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah, do you want to maybe clarify that? Where it sits?
Yes, so the leadership group that Cathy has outlined, the membership of Councillor Nimmo will report in on this particular piece of work annually. And any decisions that we're making, we're really being urged by our own communities, never mind Scottish Government, to be really fleet of foot around this funding. So there have been some natural delays that we didn't have any control of, but now we really need to be moving with this. This is non-recurring funding, so we have to really establish these tests of change. We need to move at pace because we all know that this is whole family support. So the vision really is about all families in Falkirk being able to access the right level of support for their requirements and their needs. So we really need to be agile. So it isn't us that have chosen necessarily to sit with the responsibility of all of this with the CSPP. That's where government have told us to have it sit, and actually in that particular framework it does make best sense because we can maximise all of our collective leadership, and we're all going to have to be thinking about, you know, collectively commissioning and doing things very differently, not just children's services, right across the whole piece. So it is the right place for everything to sit, and there will be those frequent reports and elected members sit in the Community Planning Partnership Board. So hopefully that will hold the piece together for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Miller. I've got Councillor Kerr and then I'll go to Councillor Murtagh, who will be the last speaker. Perhaps you could maybe share the questions you would ask, because I really just, we need to move on. Unless it's a very, very quick question that you're looking to ask, Councillor Bundy, because it's just, we've spent a long time on this particular item. I'm sorry about that, you need to get in a bit earlier. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. And thanks very much for your report, Kathleen, and the way that you've answered the past questions. My first question is, what size is this task force?
So there's me, there's a promise coordinator, because we're pulling in a response to the Falkirk's response to the promise in a partnership basis into this project as well. We have a project manager, full-time, a participation officer. We have a administrator, and then we will have a part-time accountant. But that's the structure of it at the moment.
So are they the people that will make these decisions?
No, the decisions. So it's in development at the moment, but the thinking is that they would have, the task force would have a role in screening any requests for funding for tests of change, but then there would be the multi-agency panel that would decide, and we need to have representation from the partners at that panel. So I've developed an application form for the test of change, which clearly outlines the principles that need to be met and the criteria for the fund. And then there'll be a screening panel to look at whether or not those criteria and principles are being met by the request. There's also a detailed bit about what's the money for, who's it going to impact, how will you know it's working, how will you share the learning. And then that will go to the multi-agency panel to agree or not, or maybe to go back and say, actually, no, you need to ask for, you know, this isn't quite what's required, and ask people to think again. So it will be a multi-agency group who will be appointed via that community, the children and young people's leadership group. So okay. There'll be kind of two-tiered at the screening and then the agreement for.
The reason why I'm asking is 923,000, no lot of money. Will the funding pay for these people on this task force?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So after the 3 years is up, well, it's no 3 years now, it's less than 3 years now, will the task force cease to exist?
Yes, at the moment, that would be the plan. Everybody's on either secondment or temporary contract.
Right, okay. Very challenging, 2.5 years. As Sarah's already says, we've not got the things in place already. And trying to get that in the next 2.5 years has got to be very challenging. With regards to the funding, if we identify something and the task force identifies it with our partners and we think it's got to be very successful, how have we got to fund it in the future?
Well, it might be, and I did make mention in the report about it might be that we're going to have to disinvest some of the things that we're currently doing, or we might have to align things differently. I mean, we almost certainly will have to. We won't have the capacity or the funding to expand and expand. So we really need to make the best of those partnership arrangements, make sure that we're as efficient in terms of things like referral pathways and, you know, being really, really clear with people about where they get support so that they're not going around the houses and wasting time. And so some of that stuff is about really aligning and clearing up the provision that we do have locally, but also looking at what the communities can offer themselves as well with a bit of support, because that can be a very efficient and effective way of delivering support in communities, is to really build up what they're doing already. And I think a lot of that has been lost through pandemic, a lot of kind of volunteer services, befrienders and things. I mean, we all know there's a real lack of capacity across the whole sector, really, in terms of that. So it's about rebuilding some of that existed before.
Thanks very much. Good luck with the project.
Thank you.
And the challenge, as you mentioned, will be getting families to engage. So that'll be a challenge in itself. So good luck. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Murtagh, and if you have a very quick question at the end, Councillor Bundy, I'll let you come in, but I'm just very aware we've spent a long time on this particular item. Councillor Murtagh.
Sorry, having some technical issues. I don't intend to prolong the discussion. However, it was mentioned earlier, and I think my heart kind of went a bit when the mention of the Champions Board and the comments around it. So I really just want to make a brief contribution to reassure the members of the Champions Board who have been members of this committee and indeed presented this committee quite spectacularly and very valuably, just how much elected members really value our Champions Board members, the organisation, and obviously the development over the previous few years. And I know that anybody who's had any involvement at all has been nothing but impressed. And as part of, you know, we are the corporate family, if you like, for our care experience young people. And I know we all take those responsibilities very seriously and somewhat emotively at times. So it was just really to put that on record, so that it is noted, and so that anybody from our Champions Board is aware of that and how valuable their contribution is, as I wouldn't like that to not go noted within the committee, given some previous clarification on what the Champions Board was. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Just to say, the Champions Board's been around for somewhere about 8 or 9 years now, and it's one of the most successful Champions Boards that are around the country, and we have worked hard to manage to sustain that because they're doing a huge amount of very positive work, and maybe at some point we will think about a way that we can have a greater engagement with elected members and some of our champs. It has been the subject of a discussion I've already had with officers in relation to that, but as our role as corporate parents, I think that might be helpful to look at taking that forward. Okay, Councillor Bundy, if you can keep it very brief.
Thank you, Convener. Michael was correct when he was saying that we need a vision, we need a sense of direction, and I believe you can listen whilst having a sense of direction. I don't think you have to put one aside to do the other. Cathy, you mentioned that they were aims for this, but I don't see them in the report. So I was just wondering what they are, and are they aims that you can measure without being subjective? Because looking at the foundations of the promise and the foundations and the principles, they are all subjective. I don't think anyone would disagree with them, but they are subjective in what they actually mean. So are the aims, well, what are they, and are they measurable in a way that's not subjective? Thank you.
So I suppose in very broad terms, there's the ambition of the government that by 2030, at least 5% of community-based health and social care spend should be directed towards preventative whole family support measures. There's also aims in terms of reducing the number of children who are looked after away from home. Those are all very measurable. What's really tricky and why we really need assistance from our colleagues who are experts in data is looking at the kind of trajectory of what those figures would look like if we continue doing what we're doing just now. And what we've seen in terms of the pandemic is we couldn't have stood still. Any projections that we have in terms of number of children needing to be accommodated away from home were really thrown off by the pandemic. Nobody saw that coming and the impact of that across the whole world, really. So we do need to have that that projection going forward of what we can expect realistically to achieve. I've got a soundtrack now. Yeah, so I think the broad aims are understood. There is a route map that's been provided by the government in terms of whole family wellbeing as well. And as I say, all these kind of tools and measures, a mapping tool which will provide us with a kind of as-is position at the moment, which will be our starting point. And one of the reasons that we were keen to introduce a project manager to the task force was to ensure that we are really clear. As soon as we've kind of get up and running, we will be able to be really clear about those broad aims and then break them down into manageable priorities and milestones over the next 3 years. I think that what we would be looking for is really kind of to have that broad statement of aim and objective so that we can draw the workforce and the other stakeholders, including families, in, and then we look at what the priorities are within that. This also sits within the kind of wider children's services planning, so it doesn't sit alone, it sits almost as an annex to that. So those really broad aims that we're hoping to achieve and the thorny issues that we're trying to address across the whole of children's services, you know, in terms of the education provision and early years and all of that stuff really kind of helps to inform this as well. This is just one part of much broader planning.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We're tasked with noting the report. So can we agree to note the report, and there will be a progress reported through some channels, and if there is significant interest we can make sure that there's a wider circulation of an update than just the community planning, maybe through the update bulletin or whatever within the council, so that members have the opportunity. Happy to agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6, and it's support for children seeking asylum or fleeing war in Ukraine. And we have Aaron with us who's going to take this report. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Convener. This report builds on a report that was tabled to Executive on the 26th of September last year, which highlighted the rollout of the National Transfer Scheme in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and also the Ukrainian safe routes for children as well. So this report provides a further update in relation to that, and also highlights the continued challenges and implications associated with fulfilling our statutory duties for these children, but also the report identifies proposals to address them as well. So the National Transfer Scheme was mandated and has been since the 14th of December 2021. And in Falkirk, we are currently caring for 12 unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, in line with the revised in line with the revised estimations from the Home Office. They are cared for in a variety of settings, whether that be residential, foster care or supported accommodation. Local authorities have been encouraged by the Home Office, which are initiating different opportunities for young people to be relocated through the United Kingdom within strict timescales to take children in addition to their allocation as part of the rota. In terms of the Ukrainian young people who we have in Falkirk, we currently have 66 young children who are enrolled in our school estates, and all of these children are here with an accompanying adult. Young people that we care for as part of the National Transfer Scheme have looked after status, and we have the same statutory responsibilities to these children as we would for any other looked after child who resided in Falkirk. We are required to identify a worker to take on the lead professional role for these young people, and as you'll see in section 5.2 of the report, there are a number of key responsibilities for those staff working with those young people, whether it's in terms of identifying a suitable placement, whether it's about supporting them to settle into their new life in Scotland, supporting them with initial health assessments, enrolling in education, but also progressing a child's plan in terms of their individual needs as well. We also recognise that children who are here from Ukraine and enrolled in our schools will have additional educational needs where English is not their first language. We also recognise that that takes time for teachers to be able to develop individual education support plans for them. In terms of implications, as identified within section 6 of the report, table 6.1 shows the number of young people who have been accommodated in Scottish local authorities over the past few years, and this supports the Home Office projections that the number of young people arriving by small boat will be higher in 2023 than it was in 2022. The Home Office has indicated that they are considering establishing regional intake units in all of the devolved nations, that be Wales, Northern Ireland, as well as Scotland, based on the Kent intake model. COSLA and a number of key partners are involved in a working group, but are suggesting that the regional intake model essentially shifts the problem away from the southeast of England rather than actually solve the issue, which is in terms of capacity of placements for these young people. 6.4 of the report notes in terms of some of the challenges that we have in Falkirk, which is the dedicated support that these young people need is set against a backdrop of challenges, I guess, in terms of the social work workforce that we are currently experiencing as well. The same challenges for the National Transfer Scheme also exist for the Ukrainian young people who are living in Falkirk. As I says, we recognise that it's really difficult to predict the exact nature of support that they're going to need until they may be here a number of months into their stay. Section 7 of the report looks at the implications, and the first section, which is looking at the financial implications, notes the net cost in terms of the unaccompanied asylum seeking children is £769,000, which is the expenditure, but the income that we're receiving is 416. So I just want to spend a minute just kind of trying to dissect a wee bit of that, because I'm conscious there might be some questions around that. So you'll recall in the report that I submitted to Executive in September last year, we spoke about the challenges in terms of foster care recruitment and about how difficult that was. So when we are allocated a young person as part of the National Transfer Scheme, the first thing we try to do is ensure that they have a family-based care experience. However, that's not always option because there are no foster carers available at all. And that's not just locally in Falkirk, but nationally as well. So in those instances, we are duty bound by the Home Office to take these young people because there is no negotiation. They become our child as soon as they are allocated. So we then sometimes have to access high cost placements for them. So those high cost placements don't square off with the funding allocation that we receive from the Home Office. So that's why there is a net difference in terms of the costs that's noted there. In terms of section 7.3 of the report, it kind of identifies So what we're also doing is we're projecting into the future as well. So identifying in terms of if we were to receive 12 further young people into this year, we would be estimating a grant of just over £300,000. But we also recognise that the early predictions are that that number is potentially going to increase, which will potentially put further pressures on placements. And then trying to, as I said, square that off with the grant that is allocated to us. In terms of the children who are within our schools from Ukraine, there is a support that's provided to education, and as you can see in section 7.5 of the report, £325,000 is provided, and that will be based on the 66 pupils. So if that number goes higher, then the remuneration will also be higher as well. Section 7.7 of the report notes those areas where we propose to utilise additional funding that's received from the Home Office for education provision, and section 7.8 of the report notes where we are looking to invest further money in relation to social work. So recognising the current pressures within the system and the lack of capacity to adhere to our statutory responsibilities, we are recommending that we recruit 2 social work assistants, and these posts will be temporary for the duration of 2 years, which will allow us to meet our obligations under the National Transfer Scheme. It's also important that both the current staffing resources can be flexibly utilised so that Children's Services can, if approved by the Director of Children's Services, recruit additional staff within the areas outlined in section 7.7 in the report. In terms of risks, as noted in section 7.12 of the report, the Council has both a legal and moral responsibility to safeguard children seeking asylum and fleeing war. Section 8 of the report is really concluding that this report outlines a number of challenges in terms of providing support through the National Transfer Scheme and also the Ukrainian Settlement Scheme within our existing resources, but it does again identify how we are looking to recruit and utilise those funds. So if we can take the executive back to the top of the report in terms of recommendations. Executive is asked to note the content of this report and to agree that under the circumstances the Director of Children's Services can, under delegated authority, be allowed to use funds flexibly in terms of section 7.5 and section 7.7 of the report. And also that a further report is provided to Executive later on this year as well. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Aaron, for that report. I'll go to Councillor Colley.
Yes, thank you. I'm not going to say much on this. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions, and as everyone knows, I've spoken a number of times on this, the importance of supporting children and young people seeking asylum and those young people fleeing war in Ukraine. This paper talks about the lack of suitable placements and you've expanded upon that and the challenges that this presents us. Obviously, it would be better if the funding actually matched the costs of the placements that those young people need. There is a moral imperative to this council in supporting those young people. We're not citizens of Norway, we're citizens of the world, and we need to be playing our part, albeit that I'm not fond of the terms mandated. We should be wanting to do our part, and there is obviously staffing implications to support the young people, the children and young people involved, including educational ones. It certainly, in my view, certainly does require that flexibility for the Director of Children's Services to look very clearly and respond quickly in terms of what educational resources and other resources are required for the young people to fulfil our responsibilities. Without saying anything further, I'm very happy to propose the motion and obviously you know, for the committee to be continue to be updated on the costs and implications as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. I'm happy to second the report, and I don't want to repeat what you've said, but I absolutely agree. I think it's right that we put into additional resource, particularly right now, as things are significantly pressured within the system, and we need to try and identify our most appropriate placements for these young people and make sure that they have the support round about them at what's a very difficult time. We are expected to play our part, as you've said, and I think you've put that very well. And we need to make that preparation for welcoming some more of these young people to our area and making provision for them. And it's not an easy task to be able to juggle that and continue to maintain the levels of service for our own young people as well. So I think having some additional resource will indeed significantly help smooth that process. And I hope that within 2 years' time that things might be in a better place. However, the opportunity to be able to review that at that time will be helpful, and no doubt the members will welcome the regular updates in relation to our unaccompanied young people and asylum seeking children. Councillor Spears.
Thank you, Convener. It was my great privilege to speak with the adult English learning class yesterday in this very building with some Ukrainian people whose English, I must say, was not very great, and my Ukrainian was particularly bad, but we managed to get by in German. I would like to draw attention to page 30, 7.5 and 7.6. It's saying it's based that we have 66 pupils at present. Is this expanding or detracting as people move on to other relatives or go back to Poland or Ukraine, wherever their families are staying? And I know all our children are here with relatives, right? But I'm really concerned with the UK government, it says here, and the Scottish government will be supplying the finance to cover this. That covers accommodation and education. Is that correct?
Aaron? Oh, sorry, Gary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Convener. And thanks, Councillor Spears. That's a really good question. It's become quite clear in the last probably 2 or 3 weeks since writing the report, just to be clear, that the UK government intended to fund this in full, and they allocated £22.9 million for it. They've transferred 18.6 million of that currently to the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government have distributed that by way of the estimated £325,000. So they've passed over to the Scottish Government just now, and the Scottish Government are responsible for the distribution of the funding. Part of that funding is alluded to in 7.6 in the paper. We've already put our returns in for Q2 and Q3. So the figures that we've got in here are based on those returns, which in total come to 66 children and young people just now. The second part of your question is interesting. There is a movement. We've already had a number of Ukrainian families and children that have come into the schools and they've moved elsewhere. So the answer to your question is a continually changing set of circumstances, and we think that will continue for quite some time to come. Just thought I can give you a bit of good news, Convener, if it's okay. We do. We
like good news, Gary. We like good news.
The figure of, and I want to correct the committee, the figure of £325,000 that's in the report under 7.5 was estimated. The actual figure, just confirmed last week, was 339,000, so we're 14,000 better than the estimate in the paper. So I thought we'd share a bit of good news with the committee this morning.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that. If you can find any more, keep looking. But thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just briefly repeat some of the things. I mean, clearly we are happy to be in a position to be able to support these very vulnerable young people. Absolutely essential that that happens. People fleeing war and fleeing other dreadful circumstances. You've mentioned, Gary, that the UK government's intention is to fully fund for these schemes, but as Councillor Colley already highlighted, the funding isn't actually, and as it clearly appears to me in the report anyway, the funding isn't actually covering the costs. So could you give us figures for the, and I presume the figures are slightly different across the two schemes, the asylum seekers and the refugees, but can you give us figures for how much is the actual cost to the Falkirk Council and how much are we getting returned to us through UK and Scottish Government? What's the shortfall, basically?
Okay, again, really good question, Councillor Hannah. 7.2 does confirm in terms of the National Transfer Scheme, and I think Aaron alluded to earlier on that we're operating just now with a net cost, i.e. we're not covering our full cost. Net cost is £353,000. That net cost, once we see how many of the cohort of young people we expect to come in 23-24 will change, but the estimate for income for 23-24 is 302,000. So probably if we're bringing a report later on for 23-24, we'll be able to confirm it. Just to clarify, I didn't say the UK government was funding all of it. I said the UK government have set aside 22.9 million of funding for it, and at this point in time, it's probably too early to say what the actual cost in the second part of the grant, which is the Ukrainian resettlement scheme, will be just now. And Anne quite rightly said that in terms of being preventative and proactive, we want to recruit 2 social work assistants to that. 7.7 of the report also says that we'll need to allocate some money for, parts of teachers, part for support for learning assistants. I think that's why the whole point is the director should have flexibility, because we need to respond to those demands very timelessly and very quickly, which is why the ask is today. So I think at the next update report, we'll probably be able to confirm and answer your question a lot more fully in terms of what is the real cost of the Ukrainian resettlement scheme. At this point in time, being honest about it, we don't quite know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Kerr and then Councillor Nimmo.
Hey, thanks, Convener. I'll be brief. Thanks for the report. Very disappointing in the 7.2 where Gary just mentioned, and I've said it many times, I'm not bothered what government it is. They need to support these people, and they need to support the local authorities to provide the service that we need to give them. And whether it's the UK government or the Scottish government, they need to find the money to support us on that. And I don't know if this question is appropriate or no. If it's no, just say no, I can't tell you, because identifying people out of the 66 people we've got, can you tell us how many's primary school, many's secondary school?
Gary, are you able to have that breakdown?
I can certainly provide that breakdown. I can't do it just now because I've not got all the figures in front of me, but we do break it down to early years, primary and secondary school age children. So yes, I can provide that offline for you.
Yeah, that's fine. And my last question is, with regards to 7.7, when we're talking about these proposals supporting these children, are they all at different stages? So one doesn't fit all. So I'm just thinking the language, as Councillor Spears mentioned, the language difference will be a massive thing for these families. And do they get the same education as what our own children get?
Yeah, Gary, do you want to take that?
I think it's fair to say that the point that Councillor Spears made, and you've just made yourself, all these children at different stages, that's correct. The problem is they've come in, so at the moment the schools are assessing their individual needs, and sometimes there is a collective need and group provision. So at the moment we're just at that infancy, we're at the early learning curve, if they say, to actually fully assess what the needs of the children are. But as a service, we are doing our damnedest to make sure that they receive the education that they can take in, and we can provide in the right way to make sure that young people develop as we would want all young people to develop. But one of the challenges is the language barrier just now, which is why we need that flexibility to put bits of resource into appropriate schools to meet those local demands.
Thanks, Convener. Just hope that in the next couple of years that the war finish, people can go back to their own country if that's what they wish to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Just a quick question. You can't put a price tag on things like this. To a certain extent, it's been demand driven, and we need to do all that we can to try and help out. The accommodation costs and the education costs have been mentioned, but what are these families and these children actually living off? What money is available for them to live off here locally? There's no mention of that at all. The other issue is, why is this council out of pocket if it's been funded by government? That needs to be addressed as well. I know you said there was a certain amount, Gary. It wasn't fully funded, that wasn't the words you used, but why should we be out of pocket if government is funding this? Thanks, Convener.
Okay, Gary, I don't know whether you'll be able to answer all of those aspects, but you can have a go and we'll fill in with others. Yeah. Okay, just to take the points raised individually, we really don't know what the individual circumstances of income into individual Ukrainian families are. We've not got that data. Maybe someday other services of the council might have it. We're not aware of it just now. The second part, in terms of the more holistic view in terms of who meets the additional cost, we've said in the paper, open and honestly, that's the cost that Falkirk's meeting just now. In our returns to the government, we would ordinarily hope that when they start to capture the full extent of the cost, hopefully the UK government would increase the funding, but at this point in time, we don't quite know yet. I think as we go through 23-24, the picture, the financial picture, will become clearer, and we'll be asked to provide a lot more information to the Scottish Government, who are certainly administering the Ukraine resettlement scheme just now. That part of that governance and administration is in the early days just now. They were only finalising the payment of the money just really in the last 2 weeks. So we expect to have more requests to give a more holistic picture of what our costs are. So one can only hope that in the future we may get more money just now, but at the moment the report does give an honest position in terms of where we as a service and where the council sits just now in relation to income and costs.
Thanks for that, Gary. Thanks, Convener.
Just to give reassurance that there is ongoing discussions with both Scottish Government and UK Government through COSLA in relation to the funding of the national scheme, recognising that the funding currently is not adequate, and they're continuing to press for proper funding to ensure that local authorities aren't overly burdened. I don't know whether Sarah Aran wants to take any of the other aspects around the families that are and their particular income, because some of our Ukrainian families do have their own resources when they come to this country.
And Convener, is my understanding that coming through the Ukrainian visa routes, people are able to access benefits, and obviously there'll be I know the work that we're doing in Falkirk in terms of welcoming people into our area and ensuring that people have information about how they can access supports is very readily available. In terms of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, when they come into our care, they are in our care, they are considered looked after children. So part of this resource request is really to allow us to be able to employ 2 social work assistants who would be really active around those young people and making sure that they're working alongside either their residential care home or with their foster carers, or in their supported accommodation, to make sure that they're plugged into all of the right places and get all of the opportunities, and they're able to kind of meet their developmental milestones and achieve good outcomes in our care.
Okay, I have no more indications to speak. Therefore, are we content to accept the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take just a 10-minute brief comfort break while we change over to the next team, so to speak. Okay, colleagues, can we come back into session, please? Thank you, everybody. We'll move into part B of our agenda today in the education functions. We'll start with item 7, which is the Gaelic medium education in Falkirk schools, and Mr. Naylor is going to take this report.
Thank you. Thank you, convener. Some members may recall that prior to COVID, we did a consultation to establish whether or not there was demand for Gaelic medium education in Falkirk. This is as a result of the Education Scotland Act 2016, which places a duty on education authorities to promote and support Gaelic medium education. So we did a consultation in 2019 where we consulted the parents of then 3-year-olds in our early years settings. And as a consequence of that consultation, it was decided to do a further consultation with the parents that had responded, indicating that they may have some interest. However, that consultation didn't occur because of COVID, and there was effectively a 2-year hiatus whereby we didn't do any further consultation. We were contacted during the course of 2022 by the government agency Bord na Gàidheal, that is charged with the responsibility of promoting Gaelic medium education and to encourage local authorities to make Gaelic medium provision available for those that wish it. So in the early part of this year, in January, we, together with Bord na Gàidheal, held an event where we sought to establish whether or not there was any demand for Gaelic medium education that would commence in August 2023. The provisions of the Act are that should there be 5 parents who wish their child to start primary 1 in the medium of Gaelic, then a local authority is obliged to make that provision. So the consultation that took place in January didn't result in any expressions of interest that would mean that we had 5 children that wanted to start Gaelic medium education in 2023. However, what this report is suggesting is that in order for us to further be promoting Gaelic medium education and establishing whether or not there is demand for it, it's proposed that we do a further consultation, which would be after the summer, to be looking at whether or not the parents of current 3- and 4-year-olds would wish to have Gaelic medium education moving forward. That would establish whether or not we needed to make any provision in 2024 or in 2025. The position of Bord na Gàidheal is that were there to be such a demand, then the Scottish Government has capital funding available to assist in the provision of a Gaelic medium unit, and that Bord na Gàidheal would also be supportive in identifying and supporting the council in the recruitment of staff that could deliver Gaelic medium education. Whether to be such a demand, it is most likely that any provision would be in a central Falkirk primary school, where there would be capacity for a classroom to be set aside for that provision. As I've said, the Scottish Government have capital funds available for any adaptations that were required to make that provision viable, and there would also be support available from Bord na Gàidheal in us identifying suitable staff that would undertake the teaching for children starting in primary 1. Were such a unit to be established, the plan would be that in subsequent years there would be further primary ones each year, so that over a period we would end up with a unit that had primary 1 to primary 7, and that would negate in time the requirement for Falkirk to have Gaelic medium education provided by adjacent local authorities for those few families that wish to access Gaelic medium education. So the question today really for the committee is just to approve that we will do this further consultation, and we'd then report back to committee on the demand and whether or not it looks likely that we would need to be planning to make provision in the future for Gaelic medium education. I'll pause there, convener, and see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr Naylor. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Happily, nothing valid, and yeah, I think it's really the question that's been put here in terms of the recommendations really follows on from the recommendation we already agreed at committee some time ago, as has been outlined by Mr Naylor. And I think, you know, we all agreed at that time as a committee that there would be a consultation of parents following the original sort of investigative consultation with those who would become preschool parents, if you like, in order to establish an accurate level of demand and what action could be taken forward. And obviously Mr Naylor has outlined some of those options in terms of that action that might be taken forward. And I think we've yet, obviously with COVID having been in play, we've yet to achieve that further consultation from that. And, you know, that's been sitting on our rolling action log for some time. And, you know, now we're kind of, it's almost an opportunity to basically, you know, further action that. I think, you know, although, and I was really pleased, and I see Gail Martin's on the call, really pleased that we have additional, sorry, I'm getting an echo. I'll just pause for a second. Yeah, that we're getting that we've had this additional meeting with Bord na Gaelic to actually understand further approaches about how they might support and how the parental organisation might support the rollout of what you know, government are able to fund in terms of capital investment, but also teaching costs, etc. And that's been really helpful. But we've yet to actually undertake that consultation that was agreed. And although we can garner some information from the attendance at that meeting, it's not something which we ourselves have promoted as a council yet, and obviously we have our legal obligations under the Act, which I think we're perhaps not quite yet excelling at full execution on. So I'm happy with the recommendations in the report that in effect we agreed to proceed with in the way that we had previously, which is also to continue to fulfil those requirements as required by the Gaelic Language Act and our plan under that. And I think it's really important that parents do get the opportunity to be invited to you know, be consulted on that. You know, it's one thing to accidentally come across you know, something which you might be interested in. It's another thing to be able to actually be invited and made aware of what options are there for parents across all levels of education. And I hardly probably need to elaborate my own views on how important it is that we explore all measures which increase attainment, and obviously the evidence is there that medium in another language from an early stage in particular, there is evidence from a Gaelic medium education point of view that does increase and help with attainment. We should be exploring all these measures to assist getting the best for all our students in that regard. So I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report, which, as I say, are really just to reaffirm what we had already agreed and progress with a proper full consultation that allows parents to input and be cognizant of their options for their children going forward. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, and Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to formally second this and reserve the right to come back in.
Okay, thank you. Declan.
Thank you. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it costs about over £50,000 for a teacher. So if you have a class with 5 kids, 1 teacher, it's quite a lot of money to spend for every child. It's not a better use for resources, given money's quite tight right now.
Okay, Mr Naylor, do you want to have any comment on that?
Just to agree with what Declan has said, it would be, in the first instance, very expensive educational provision. However, there is a Gaelic Medium Act, and we are required to undertake this consultation, and we are required to promote Gaelic medium education. But the point that you've made in terms of any small scale provision, it is necessarily inefficient to be having a teacher for potentially as few as 5 children. In any primary school setting, ordinarily the smallest grouping of children would be 25. So were there to be a grouping as small as 5, then it would be an expensive provision.
Sorry, if I could just come in to add information for that as well. Robert stepped in because my 2-year-old, in case I interrupt you, is next to me and sick today. Scottish Government would also provide a grant to cover the costs that we don't receive per capita. So if the amount that we receive from Scottish Government for a teacher for the school doesn't meet the full amount for a salary, for an annual salary, Scottish Government will cover that until we have enough children within the school to break even as such. So there would be no additional cost in the initial stage for staffing.
Okay, thank you for that, Gail. That's helpful. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. I would imagine, like most other elected members just now, are inundated with requests from parents on school travel, swimming in schools, etc. I understand this is an act of the Scottish Parliament that they will fully fund if they can manage to get the children to attend. The lowlands of Scotland is not a traditionally Gaelic-speaking area. And my concern is that we could be spending money that could be spent in other places at this particular time. I have nothing against Gaelic and the Scottish language, but you know, is it a luxury we can afford at this present time? And maybe if more work had been done by getting more money for the Scottish Government, we wouldn't have to say these words, but we do have to say these words. And check your inbox, because everybody out there is saying the same thing. They want swimming pools in their school. They want their kids to get transport to school. And it is a bit like we're looking at some grandiose idea of the Scottish Government that they're prepared to pay, but they're not prepared to give us the funding to keep vital departments opening our schools. So I'll just say that as how I feel personally at the moment.
Okay, Councillor Spears, I'll move to Councillor Kerr, and about Councillor Hannah and Councillor Steinbank.
Thanks, Convener. With regards to, I had a conversation with my friend last night whose granddaughter goes to school in Cumbernauld, and she was telling me that she will not be able to do any English speaking or learning until she's in primary 3. So with regards to when you mentioned primary 3 and primary 4, Robert, will that disproportionate these children learning at that stage? Because I think it's easier straight away in primary 1, but will that make a difference?
Okay, Mr Naylor.
I'm going to go to Gail in a minute just for detail of this, but my understanding is that the model is that children are taught entirely in the medium of Gaelic from primary 1, and as Councillor Kerr says, you are at the primary 3 stage before English is introduced, and I think even later certain other concepts are introduced as children move forward through towards primary 7, but I'll defer to Gail for the detail of that.
Thanks, Robert. Yes, P1 to 3 is full immersion, so all children would learn fully in the medium of Gaelic. From P4 to P7, that changes where English is introduced. However, Gaelic is still the predominant language that's used throughout the classroom. The statutory element of Gaelic medium education for a local authority is that it's primary we would provide. Some authorities would also provide secondary. That's very different depending on the setup, where some it might just be a Gaelic medium class that children can go to. Others, they have a bigger, such as Glasgow, school that they can offer various subjects within Gaelic. But for primary, and the transition from full immersion in P1 to 3 to then English and Gaelic works really well for the children. And develops their learning further as well in terms of that multi-language that Councillor Murtagh talked about earlier as well.
And my next question is, you mentioned that we would identify a central primary school if we got the 5 children. Would that school run the same as the one at Common Road? But you've just mentioned, Gail, that they would all be in the same class all the way up to the Leaf Primary School.
It would operate similar to Glendoret, sorry Robert. However, obviously if numbers grow, we would then need to look at whether if there's too many children for it to be one class. But generally you wouldn't have a composite class of P1 to P7. So we would have to reassess that each year based on the number of children that are attending and obviously their support needs as well.
Thank you. My final question, how does that impact on Roman Catholic children with their faith?
To be honest, Councillor Kerr, I think what would happen is that if a parent were to select Gaelic medium education, then the Gaelic medium unit would be focusing on, as Gail says, full immersion and teaching in the medium of Gaelic. The standard component of religious education that relates to all primary schooling would apply in terms of the Gaelic medium class, but we wouldn't, to the best of my knowledge, no council has a Catholic Gaelic medium provision, or indeed a non-denominational Gaelic medium provision. They just have Gaelic medium provision.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks, Gail. Thanks, Gail.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. Just a couple of questions. Clearly, absolutely in support of multilingual, never mind bilingual, education for young people. But in relation to the Gaelic medium learning, you said, Mr. Naylor, that you had meetings earlier this year about the 2023 intake for August. And is there any evidence that there is an increasing demand for Gaelic medium learning that has led to this additional consultation?
No, that's why we want to have the consultation.
Okay, thank you.
What, and I think Councillor Murtagh alluded to this. In order to establish what the demand is, you need to ask people, but you also need to tell them that the possibility exists. And what we did previously was we asked the parents of then primary 3 children that should it exist, would they be interested? And the initial response we got to that consultation was that there were people who wanted to find out more. And the planned consultation that didn't take place during COVID would have been a consultation with perhaps some more information available for parents, where they would have been informed of the reality of what such an option would mean. And that would have meant that we would have shared practice details from 1 or 2 of the the councils, not least North Lanarkshire and Stirling, to be sharing with parents what the experience was actually like. One of the things that I mentioned, that the likelihood of a central Falkirk location, what parents would need to realise is that were they to opt for Gaelic medium education, their children would be travelling a considerable distance to their primary schooling every day. So, for example, if somebody elected to have Gaelic medium education who lived in Bo'ness, then that child most likely would be in a taxi every morning from age 5 until they got to the end of primary 7. And depending on what the demand was and what the growth was, there would be every likelihood that when that child got to the end of primary 7, they would be going into their local mainstream secondary school.
Okay, thank you. That does lead me on to the second question that I have, which is that in the event that there were 5 children identified and that such a unit was being set up, I do understand from what has been said that the Scottish Government would be providing capital funding and would give support with the teaching costs. But would all the costs of that educational provision be covered by funding from the Scottish Government, including the taxis from across all of the Falkirk Council area?
That would need to be determined. It has not been our experience thus far. The approximately 20 or so children that undertake Gaelic medium education that are Falkirk children at the moment, who are either attending schools in Stirling or in North Lanarkshire, the cost of that is partly funded by a Scottish Government grant, but the Scottish Government grant is considerably less than the transport costs that we expend on an annual basis. I'm pretty sure Mr. Greenhorn would be able to tell you the difference between the grant and what it is that we spend on an annual basis currently. So whilst Gail has said that the Scottish Government have indicated that they would give us capital for any setup, the creation of equipment, the purchasing of materials, books and so on, they've also indicated that they would assist with the revenue cost of recruiting a teacher, but I'm not aware of any promise on transport costs.
Gary.
Okay, thanks, Convener. For the year 22-23, the Scottish Government grant income for transport costs to take our children for Gaelic medium education is £14,000. Our actual transport costs are £63,000. So transport costs have been rising over several years, and the £14,000 grant has remained static for several years. That's the figures for this year.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask my final question? We're going back now for a second consultation. Do I presume that this is going to happen every 2 or 3 years in the future, whether or not we get sufficient numbers of children and families with the interest in Gaelic medium learning? So do we come back every 2 or 3 years and do the consultation again? And if so, what's the cost of that?
The cost of a consultation is officer time. So to answer your question about every 2 or 3 years, we will continue to have a duty to be seen to be promoting. So I can't see any option other than for us to continue to ask the question, even if there is no demand identified. It would, however, be, I suppose, for the committee to say, let's say that we get to 26, 27 and we've asked the question multiple times, the committee could take a view that it was going to not ask the question again for another X years.
Can I also add that we're working with obviously Bord na Gaelic and Common and Parent as part of this, and their experience has been when they've been working with local authorities, it only takes to the second year of consultation in order to get the demand of parents. So Fife, for example, were in a similar position last year when they carried out their consultation, and it's this year that Fife will be opening up. There's a few other authorities that were in their first year, and at the moment Fife is the only one that's went on to 2 years. Ours is taken to a second consultation, obviously because of COVID. So Bord na Gaelic are confident that there would be 5 parents that would come forward and would wish to take forward Gaelic medium education. It's just about making sure we have the right information out there so they can make an informed decision.
Thank you very much, and thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinberg.
Thank you, convener. I'm not going to duplicate any of the questions. I'd just like to thank Robert and Gail first for sort of taking us through the issues and obligations around this. I think for our young people to have access to any language skills, of course, is a positive thing. However, I think a lot of the concerns raised by members and myself is the initial assessment of demand from our communities does lead to a couple of questions around resource allocation, as Declan's earlier question highlighted. I think my first question then is, in the instance of sickness or holiday of the one teacher, what provisions exist to maintain education delivered in the medium for primary school pupils?
I can only comment on a conversation that we had, Gail and I had, when we met with Bord na Gal, and I asked that particular question. So my question was based on the resilience and, if you like, teacher strength in depth. So the very point that you've just raised, what do other authorities do if they have one Gaelic medium teacher and that Gaelic medium teacher either leaves or is off sick? And the answer I received was that the education would continue in the medium of English. So perhaps if a system becomes more mature, you might have several Gaelic medium teachers. But in the first instance, if we started with 5 and we had one teacher, then you are carrying, in my view, a continued risk that you're dependent on a sole individual for that delivery.
Thank you, and I appreciate that risk might be mitigated for pupils who start in the curriculum from P4 onwards in English. But is that answer the same for all primary school pupils, even those who hadn't started learning in English, Robert?
Well, for all primary school pupils, if any individual teacher is off, there are supply teachers, there are cover teachers. So if a primary school teacher is off sick, then another teacher takes their place. That's part of the normal process. This would be a slightly different situation where another teacher would take their place, but the teacher that took their place would not be delivering the same curricular offer that the parents had signed up to.
Thank you very much. My second question, just slightly broader. Do we currently have any provision within our secondary school system to permit those who wish to learn Gaelic to a level 5 or level 6 SQA level or achieve an award?
No, we don't.
Nice, thank you. That's all my questions, convener. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just before I bring Alan in, I've got Alan and then I've got Maureen Hartness. If there are any other speakers, could they indicate now so that we can move the business on? Okay, Maureen will be our last speaker. Alan.
Thanks, convener. Robert, just a question in relation to the consultation costs, and I know you've touched on that already. You've maybe even answered the question. Resources going forward. We've spoken briefly about the potential of other surveys being done in the near future. There's obviously going to be cost implications in relation to this. Now, bearing in mind the current financial situation and the budget cuts that this council is currently having to make on an ongoing basis, and this is going to happen in the years to come as well. How do you see the resource side of things panning out? Will you have enough staff to carry out this function in the future? And will the money be coming direct from the Scottish Government to cover the consultation, or are we going to have to foot the bill ourselves for that? Thanks, Convener.
We won't be getting any money from the Scottish Government to carry out a consultation. The way that the council conducts consultations currently is that the council identifies what the consultation is to be and who the most appropriate officers are to conduct that consultation, and all consultation activities are met from within existing resources. So, for example, the SPR consultation that's been undertaken recently and the home to school transport consultation that have been undertaken, the costs of such activity is met by the relative council directorate and the fielding of their officers to undertake the activity. It would be no different to do a consultation on Gaelic medium education. It would be children's services officers that arranged the activity and attended the meetings and wrote the reports.
Thanks for that, Robert. Councillor Steenbank asked the question regarding National 5 and how many pupils we currently have who are actually studying for this. I think it's an important point. We don't actually have any pupils studying for this, so I think that goes a long way in showing how popular this language actually is in secondary schools. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. It still should not prevent us from at least having that as an option on the table, available to people should they wish. I'll go to Maureen.
Does that mean
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Convener. About the Catholicity of these children. If these children are practicing Catholics and their families are practicing Catholics, they will be entitled to receive 3 different sacraments in the primary school. So primary 3, which they would still be immersed in the Gaelic medium, is the sacrament of reconciliation. Then they have First Communion in primary 4 and then confirmation in primary 7. It's a prerequisite of the Catholic Church that if you are a teacher in a Catholic school and you're teaching the Catholic faith, you need to be a baptised Roman Catholic. You need to have a current PP reference, and you also need to have a Catholic teacher certificate. And I'm just wondering, it's sometimes quite a struggle to get these from Scottish teachers who claim to be Catholics. However, you would then have that addition to add on to the qualifications of the Gaelic medium teacher. If they were teaching primary 3 about reconciliation, they would need to be approved by the Catholic Church. And then also, who would they make their reconciliation service with? Is there a Gaelic priest nearby that would be able to converse with them, or do they have to do that in English? There's the complications there where they're then going out into the bigger world. And also, if they are immersed in one classroom, how are they going to feel part of the whole school community for things like Christmas celebrations and other things that occur throughout the year? I don't think we've really considered that very well. So that there's the Catholicity of these children if they're practicing Catholics, and also the bigger picture of the school. If they're doing Gaelic and then suddenly they're doing English things, that kind of thing. It just worries me that these kids might come in and be really quite concerned, about what they're doing, where they're going, that kind of thing. And also with the 5 to 14 curriculum, would these children be assessed in Gaelic for their reading and their writing to tie in with the assessments that are done in the early years for reading and writing in English? So we would be passing on information about levels of attainment, and then would these children be done in the Gaelic medium, or, sorry, I don't know who's going to answer that.
Okay, I'll go to Mr Naylor, but I think is there not an element here where there'd be parental choice would have an influence in relation to that? So I think that might play a role. But Robert, that was a very complicated question.
So the short answer, Maureen, is apologies. I don't know. So your points about for example, First Communion and so on, I don't know what other Gaelic medium provisions do to address the issue of needing to have a Catholic qualified teacher teaching the various sacraments. My guess would be that at the point of selection, that effectively what parents are doing is that they know what they're signing up for, and that's what they sign up for. If they are Catholic, then perhaps some of the elements that you're talking about would be done through church provision rather than through school provision. In terms of the attainment, certainly until primary 3, the assessment of reading, writing, talking, listening would be done in the medium of Gaelic, not in the medium of English. So in terms of comparator data that we would ordinarily look at to be comparing how successful learning was in one setting versus another, we would have a very unique, bespoke, small cohort where the data would not be comparable to what was happening in other parts of the school. In terms of what you said about whole school activity and things like Christmas and sports days and so on and so forth, I don't see that there would be necessarily any great difficulty there. Children attending a school, albeit in a particular class with a particular medium, would not be in any way excluded from some of the wider aspects of school life. I don't see that would be particularly difficult for head teachers to arrange full inclusion in those sorts of activities.
I'll just come in further as well. First of all Gaelic medium schools would be considered non-denominational in how they run across Scotland. So if parents are opting who have children that are Christian Catholic, then they would obviously be taking on that responsibility to take forward the faith and work with their local church to make sure that they can take forward in reconciliation their First Communion and confirmation, etc., and continue that further. So that part would be taken within the parent's responsibility rather than the school's responsibility, because we wouldn't be in a position to be able to put in place a Catholic Gaelic teacher. That maybe there's one there, but that wouldn't be the provision it would be creating. And just as Robert was saying regarding participation, what we see within other Gaelic medium education schools is where there's a unit within a full primary school, is that participation is very heavily supported. That's the type of activities that they would be taking part in terms of using song in order to learn the language, playing different instruments, etc. They're fully immersed within that across the rest of the school as well, and they participate as any other child would be within school assemblies and concerts, etc.
Can I just say for your information as well that in St Francis Xavier we do have an ex-teacher who, after we had all the Polish immigrants moving to Scotland, they actually attended their local school regardless of whether it was, denominational or non-denominational, but they needed preparation for their sacraments. And there is this teacher who meets outside school hours, maybe on a Saturday morning for an hour, and prepares the children, in English. For what's happening, because by then they've usually got quite a good command of, I would say, English, but then you've got the Falkirk aspect as well, because they sound as if they've been born and raised in Scotland, so that is available, depending on where you wanted to have the Gaelic medium school, if that was what parents wanted, So there is an outlet there for it.
Okay, thank you for that, Maureen. I'll go to Councillor Murphy now to sum up.
Thanks, convener. It's been interesting to listen to the questions and comments that have come forward. I note that there is no contrary proposal to the recommendation, and I think I do want to kind of correct the record a bit in terms of an additional consultation. There hadn't been a consultation. That's why there is the recommendation that's here. There, we can't base the judgment of what demand is on what we haven't already asked in that question, and you can't say that there's no interest in something when you don't offer it in the first place. So, I think, I'm not going to put words in the parents' mouths in terms of what the outcome of a consultation might be, but it is right that we ask the question, and it is right that we follow our legal obligations to do so, and that's all that we're really here to do. I think there's obviously a wider debate on the merits of Gaelic medium education, but I would note that this has unanimous cross-party support in the Parliament, which has been referenced in terms of bringing this forward. It's not something that's a niche subject, and indeed across the country we've seen demand for this grow and the success of this, and there's evidence, proper academic evidence which shows the benefit. Now, if parents don't want that, then that's fine, and we can reflect that in our decision making. There's no a proposal here to establish a unit, but at the moment we do offer, as by right, the ability for parents, should they wish, to have their children schooled in Gaelic medium education, but they have to travel out with the area, and that may indeed influence many as to why they don't wish to send their children, and perhaps bringing that closer and giving the option and the understanding to parents that they have that option is helpful, and the context of that in terms of the consultation really important. So I hear what Maureen was saying, and I think it is important that we don't muddy the water on that too much in terms of, at the moment, there are many children who are baptised Catholic who do not go to a Catholic school, as is their choice, my own children included in that, but they still have the right to receive the sacraments and be prepared for them in different ways, and that already exists across the estate, and it is about parental choice. So I'm very much in favour of making sure that we have a proper, well-informed consultation that enables parental choice, and for them to tell us how they would wish us to proceed in line with our obligations. And I think it is also important, and congratulations to Gail for her contributions, especially in the challenging circumstances, and we've all been there. Gail, you did fantastically well, but that there is that fully funded commitment from the Scottish Government, and at the moment it does cost Falkirk Council, as Gary outlined, additional transport monies to send the children who exercise their right to be schooled in Gaelic medium education out with the authorities. So this is about seeing if we can improve on that offer, finding what's appropriate for Falkirk, but we won't achieve that if we don't ask the question and make parents properly aware. So I'm happy that we'll be going forward on that basis today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving on to our final item, item 8, which is school leaver destinations and attainment 21-22, and Rona J is going to take this report this morning. Thank you, Rona.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say good morning, but we are now good afternoon. So good afternoon, and thank you for the chance to bring this paper to you. So having read the paper, you'll know the purpose is to provide you with information on the totality of attainment of young people leaving our secondary education system for session 21-22. And the report covers the qualifications that have been gained, progress towards closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and destinations beyond school. The report demonstrates the impact schools are having on meeting the Council Plan priority of promoting opportunities, educational attainment and reducing inequalities. And our recommendations in this report are asking you to note the results for session 21-22, to note the continuing trend of positive progress across a range of measures, and request that the Director of Children's Services continues to engage with schools and to track and monitor progress with partners for positive destinations. So paragraphs 4.1 to 4.5 give you some background information telling you about the cohorts comprising of pupils leaving education in S4, S5 and S6 in secondary, the measures used to capture how well pupils have attained at the point of exit and the leaver destination thereafter, and it notes the changes to assessment processes in session 2019-20 2020-21 and in 2021-22, and the impact thereof of comparing this cohorts to the attainment of any previous years, because it's been different for them all, as you know. And senior phase pupils in session 21-22 were the first to sit exams in 3 years. So we're also noting here that leaver attainment can be accrued in a suite of accreditations and qualifications gained over a number of academic sessions, and that destination data may reflect choices made by pupils and opportunities available to them after school, and some of these, as you will also appreciate, are affected by the impact of the pandemic. So taking you on to the considerations section, which is paragraphs 5.1 to 5.46, a lengthy section. The information here is to provide you an attainment and performance for school leavers on their destinations, literacy at level 4 and 5, numeracy at level 4 and 5, closing the poverty-related attainment gap, improving attainment for all, attainment at SCQF, level 6 hires and equivalent qualifications, and vocational qualifications. The data is tabled to show you in each case how we are benchmarked against our virtual comparators, which is schools and other local authorities who've got similar demographic characteristics as our schools. The Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative, which comprises of ourselves, Stirling, Clackmannanshire and West Lothian, and the Scottish National Average. So the first section of that is our destinations at 5.3 to 5.8. And this data is supplied to the Scottish Government by Skills Development Scotland, the SDS, as we in education like to abbreviate it to. We can discuss the data on the economic status of our young people through SDS's 16+ data hub, and we do that continuously throughout the year with our schools. In the weeks leading up to the snapshot in October of leader destinations, we monitor the current status of the school leavers cohort and keep schools updated on the number of young people without a positive destination or with an unknown destination. Schools are often still in contact with these young people and can provide information on their economic status and can provide them with support to secure a positive destination or move forward. I'd like to note a wee amendment to 5.3. It is in fact 1,704 pupils, not as it says there 1,703. So that's just a point for accuracy. And that's across S4, S5 and S6 who left Falkirk Council schools in session 21-22. And whilst our figures are down by 1.2% from the previous session, we are pleased to have maintained this improving trend over the last 13 years, and particularly through and post-pandemic. We do note in 5.8 that there were fewer pupils who went on to higher education. A lot of this, we think, is to do with the experience that they saw of their peers before them, who had a very remote experience. There was a 2% increase in college uptake, and we think that could be to do with being closer to home and more accessible, and a 2% increase on those wishing to go straight into employment. And again, a lot of young people have talked to us about wanting to get into employment because of the cost of living. So there are different factors as to why these figures fluctuate, but we're pleased to see, although it's a drop in further education, we are pleased to see increases in college and increases into employment. Moving on to literacy, which is paragraphs 5.9 to 5.14, there's incremental improvement here. At level 4, we're sitting at 98%. We are above our virtual comparators. We're above the Regional Improvement Collaborative, and we're above the national levels, and this places us in the first performance quartile nationally. At level 5, we've a sustained pre-pandemic performance level. This is similar to our virtual comparator, to the RIC and to the national performance, and it places us in the second quartile. For numeracy, at level 4, we've sustained the 97% achieved in 2021, and again, we're above our virtual comparators, collaborative and national averages. At level 5, we're 80% achieving a level 5 award, and this is places again above our comparators and national averages. And whilst it's a slight drop from session 2021, it is improved from pre-pandemic levels, so we're pleased about that. And this places us in the first quartile for both of these measures. In closing the poverty-related attainment gap, which is paragraphs 5.21 to 5.26. Again, just to note that Falkirk's performance in chart 7 is above the national average for all of the deciles for tariff points. 5.26, notice attributing factors to this incremental improvement. To summarise some of these, there is our service approach to tracking and monitoring, the approaches taken to supporting attainment of children. There's a rigorous programme of quality assurance and quality improvement in place, and there has been for a number of years. Curriculum structures and learning pathways are continually changing and broadening to offer choice and a variety of qualifications and accreditations for our young people. We are now seeing the impact of people equity funding because things have had time to embed now and have been incrementally improved over the last few years. And most importantly, I think from my point of view and our services point of view, is the innovation, the collegiality and the collaboration between our schools and the central improvement team to manage and mitigate the impact of the pandemic. We're all aware of the impact of the pandemic and the disruption to learning has, as expected, predicted impacted on our progress to reducing the gap. But we are really pleased to see that when you look across nationally and our comparators, it's not been a lesser extent in Falkirk, and we are really confident that we can accelerate this progress moving forward. At 5.24, we're looking at quintile 1 and quintile 5 comparisons, and that's showing the difference between those in our most deprived quintile, which is quintile 1, and those in our most affluent. We use this data continuously with our schools. Every primary school and every secondary school is provided with this data for the broad general education and for the senior phase. This information is updated every term following our central gathering of attainment and achievement predictions, and we discuss what it shows us in these predictions with our schools every term. In terms of proving attainment for all in 5.27 to 5.33, we've had raising attainment as a core service priority since 2017. The school-based and improvement team's rigorous and continuous tracking and monitoring of progress and attainment supports this positive progress. This is a national measure, and it's reflected in our local tracking and monitoring process and analysis throughout the year. Again, whilst there is variation between cohorts of pupils as would be expected, we remain in the first quartile for this measure and above our virtual comparators, RIC and national averages for all three groups, our lowest attaining 20%, our middle 60% and our highest attaining 20%. Attainment to SCQF, which is paragraphs 5.34 to 5.41, we are in line with our virtual comparators, our collaborative and national benchmarks. For 1 or more level 6 qualifications, we're placed in the second quartile. For 3 or more level 6 qualifications, we're placed in the second quartile. And for 5 or more level 6 qualifications, we're placed in the first quartile. Whilst there are some variations, pre-pandemic levels have been sustained or improved, despite the changes and disruptions to learning and teaching and the external assessment process changing over the last 3 years. And just to reinforce that rigour of scrutiny and support and challenge around predictive data is in place. We have tracking and monitoring of progress and attainment from early level right the way through to the senior phase. We have targeted interventions and approaches for those children who are not managing to make the progress that we would hope they would. And our breadth of qualification and accreditation opportunities is ever increasing. And just to reinforce again at the end of that, I believe that the strength of our partnerships between our schools and ourselves in the centre bring about this incremental improvement. In vocational qualifications, we are very proud of our continued progress in this measure and that we are again placed in the first quartile nationally. And whilst there was a drop in level 5, there were increases for level 6 at higher and level 7 for advanced higher vocational qualifications. To note the equality section, we are continually looking as a service priority at self-evaluation, tracking and monitoring, and within that we are paying particular attention to groups of interest. You'll remember from our stretch aims brought to you in September that we're looking particularly at those care experienced young people across the service. We're focusing on attendance as a service and across our RIC, and we're continually looking at those children in SIMD quintile 1. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share the achievements of the service, to commend our schools and my officers, and noting our capacity to sustain high levels of performance now and going forward, and to reassure you of the ongoing approaches to assess the impact of the pandemic. As said around about attendance, our service improvement plan commitment to learning and teaching assessment will remain for the foreseeable future. We're committed to workforce development to help our teachers remain skilled and able to meet the needs of the ever-changing demographics of our pupil cohorts. And we're managing and recognising the anxiety within families at the moment around about education, particularly recently, the impact on those about to sit exams of the recent strike actions. We're aware that that has caused pupils and staff and families some anxiety. We're also aware that there are a number of pupils going forward who are sitting exams again for the first time. So as schools did last year, there are extensive supports across all our secondary schools to offer study support and assertive mentoring. So thank you.
Thank you, Rona. It's nice to finish with a very positive report, but I'll go to Councillor Murtagh to move the report.
Thanks, convener, and I take the hint on the good afternoon statement, and then I can feel the hard stare from here in terms of not diving into some of these statistics. I think if we start, we may never quite get to the end of the conversation. I want to begin though by absolutely extending my thanks to Rona and the whole team across Children's Services, both those involved in the very front line of delivery, and indeed the support functions in the centre and everybody involved. I think these are positive results. They have been reflective of the most challenging circumstances, but they do show positive trends, and yes, it would be easy to pick out here and there where there are potential dips in certain metrics, but I think that if there's one thing the pandemic has taught us is that not to be dramatic of, life as we know it has changed somewhat, but that perhaps the traditional trajectory of things and where we're expecting, people are re-evaluating, and that includes our children and our parents, maybe where they were so automatically expected to go, they are beginning to look at a wide variety of options, and I think that's a positive thing. But as I say, I think that the metrics do show real positive progress, and there is a good news story, as the convener says. I do just want to reflect, however, it's impossible not to sit here as a parent also, and to really have, I suppose, felt something which I didn't really expect to have felt, in the level of anxiety, seeing the impact of the pandemic, and also, as Rona mentioned, there are some other aspects this year that are built on that. But the real struggle that has been for children to see the chopping and changing within that learning environment, not just within the learning environment, within social environments, within how they have experienced growing up. And I think, our children and our young people and those sitting exams, they deserve our support unequivocally, unconditionally, and I think they deserve our praise and our congratulations on all they've managed to achieve and continue to achieve. I don't think that it can be understated, the challenges that they have faced, and I'm really extraordinarily grateful in a very heartfelt way to those who have supported the children and the families in family learning and emotional support and development all through that process, and who continue to do so. It's been invaluable, and I don't think that we would see the kind of results and trends within these wonderful graphs and bubbles, which I absolutely do love to drill down into, without that dedicated support. But I do want to give that a special highlight and mention to the efforts of the children themselves who have made this, made these results, and I wish them well in their coming exams. I know many of them are sitting prelims and things like that at the moment, and it is a very stressful time, but I think we should all express our good wishes to them and our continued supportive efforts to do whatever we can to help them to achieve, because it has been really challenging. So thanks again to Rona and our team, and I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report that we noticed. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. I'm happy to formally second. I think we need to be mindful that there are always going to be opportunities, but within things like this, for fluctuations. But what we are seeing overall is a sustained improvement from where we were, and continuing to build on what has been achieved by the collaboration of our young people, our teachers and their parents over a period of time, and that is despite all the interrupted learning and the disruption around COVID, and all the trials of coming back into education. So I think as an authority, we should be very proud of our young people, but not sit back on our laurels, and we should always be striving to achieve that wee bit more for our young people, certainly going forward, and making sure that we continue to help them reach their aspirations and their goals, and encourage them to be as high as they wish them to be, and not be constrained in any way. But I think it's a very positive report. It's something that we can look to continue to build on going forward. I'll now open it up for discussion and debate. I've got Councillor Bundy and I've got Councillor Steinbach.
Thank you, convener. Education does play two key roles, I think. One is allowing children to broaden and deepen their skills and knowledge, and in these rankings we're doing very well. We tend to be in the top 50% for them all. For level 7 vocational, I see that we're #1 in Scotland, which is fantastic. We see that for the different levels of attainment, for the lower 20%, middle 60%, top 20%, we're in the top 25% for all that, and it's fantastic, and I think that is something worth commending. Though it does seem to be a bit of a mismatch for the second part, because the second part is career opportunities, and for positive destinations we're ranking 26th, which is down from 19th place last year, so 26 out of 32. So when we are ranking so highly on education, it seems to be a mismatch that we're ranking lowly on the positive destination. So I was just wondering, why is there that mismatch, and what's being done to address it?
Thank you, Councillor Bundy. I think, as we've talked about, there are different cohorts going through under different circumstances. We do know that a lot of our young people, as we said, chose to go into employment rather than further education. We're currently working with our Forth Valley College partners to see what the uptake there. We were a bit concerned about some of the pass rates for foundation apprenticeships, etc. for there. So we're working very closely with Skills Development Scotland and Forth Valley College. We do know that some young people were currently investigating and done a bit of work over the last couple of years to see about the staying in university for those young people who went on to university. Did they sustain those places beyond first year? We know that a lot of young people had a real struggle with the remote aspect of university, and at the moment lots of universities are still doing a lot of their tutorials and lecturing online, which doesn't suit everybody. So I can't answer your question in great detail because there's lots of things we have to investigate. There's a particular dip around about decile 5 there, so we want to look to see why is it that decile 5 had a slightly different performance to all the others who were above. So our job now is to take the information that we've brought to you and do even further interrogation of it as we do. And as we move into this 4th term and exams, we'll be looking at the sort of trends and predictions of our attainment for June, what people are doing for that. We're also investigating just now, we're not investigating, but we're evaluating with our secondary schools the impact of last year's study support programmes, which were funded by the Scottish Government. And this year that's not been in place, but we've put our own in. So we're now doing a bit of work with them to see how's that going, what sort of things are on offer this year. Are we having as high an uptake out with school of young people and families accessing the eSchoil resource? What's the uptake for any summer Easter schools that are happening? And are children accessing study support for the subjects that they really need the help in, or are they going to things that they're confident in? So we're tracking all of these things just now, and that's the commitment we have, as we've said in the conclusion, to that ongoing self-evaluation. So as these pieces of information come out, we adapt our quality assurance processes and our quality improvement processes to match that need. So last year we recognised that coming out of the pandemic, that the quality indicator from How Good Is Our School, which is 3.2, raising attainment, we recognised that was going to be a big focus for all of us because our children were coming out of very disrupted learning, so our quality assurance focused on 3.2. The things that we learned from that then focused our attention in the latter half of this session onto quality improvement indicator 2.3, which is learning, teaching and assessment. And that's taking a really close look about the quality of provision that young people have in classrooms. And that's then leading now to our commitment, as we said, to workforce development. So all of these things come from the evaluation we do, the data that we get, and we will find out from this evaluation of this current data, which became live in February, what it is that's resulting in that drop and what we can do to improve that. And is it particular to a cohort of children in circumstance? Is there something wider than that that we need to do something more targeted about? And that will be reflected in the paper we bring to you at the same time next year. And it'll also be reflected in the paper that we bring to committee in September, which looks at the attainment just of SQA exams in June.
I think there's too many lights on.
Thank you, Rona. A lot of the circumstances that you say just aren't limited to Falkirk. So children from across Scotland are they've got that transition back into the classroom, university, college, etc. So that doesn't explain to me that decline on the national comparison. So what's that specific thing that we're doing or not doing, which is causing that? Would be good to know, and I look forward to seeing that research. And just to note very quickly, you said that in the initial response to my question that there has been a drop going to university and employment, but employment is still a positive destination, so I don't think that explains this drop in 5.4.
No. And as you quite rightly asked, that's our job, is to find out why. And if it is a national trend because of context and circumstance that we're in line with, well, nobody wants that. But if it's a national drop because of the circumstances, then we're okay with that, not that we'd want to be. But if it's a very particular thing to Falkirk, then what is it we need to do differently? Is it something we have to do with Forth Valley College? Is it something we have to do with our course choices? Are we making sure that the course choices young people are opting for are then going to lead them into the destination that they want to meet? So, as we said in the paper, it's about always trying to adapt and change our curriculum offer to make sure that we have as broad and as wide a range of experiences and opportunities that children can take that then give them that pathway of learning that gives them choice when they leave school as to what they would want to do. And we're always evaluating, as is our secondary school cohort, what that looks like. That's an ongoing process for every school. Their school improvement plans reflect how they want to change that year on year, what their priorities got to be. They'll be interrogating this data with us to look to see what they might want to change for the next session. The school improvement planning system is kicking in right now. So schools are working on their standards and quality reports ready for September, which show the impact of their priorities from last year, and they'll be using that information and evaluation to set their priorities for this year coming, and that's when they'll target what they might want to do with this senior phase and how that will impact on more positive destinations for next session.
Okay, thank you. Just so that people are aware, I do have Councillor Steenbank, we've got Declan, we've got Councillor Hannah, Councillor Nimmo and Mr Chalmers, and at that point I'll go back to Councillor Murtagh to sum up, but I'll go to Councillor Steenbank first.
Thank you, Convener. I did have a few questions, but most of them have been answered, so I just have one at the end. I'd just like to say congratulations to our young people and teachers across the Falkirk Council area. The many that I meet as this council's children and young persons elected member champion are a credit to their schools, their communities, and their achievement recorded in this report is something we should all celebrate, especially in the context, as has been said, of the difficult few years endured with the COVID pandemic and the very tough economic environment. I do share a few of the concerns that Councillor Bundy just outlined on the decline of from 19 to 26 out of the 32 local authorities, but thanks to Rona for her answers about how that's going to go forward. I think it's probably a broader question I now have, which is how, and I think it was just touched on there, how will the data in this report be effectively utilised to form effective engagement with our Forth Valley College and university partners, as well as the employment and training unit? And what does that process and the timelines related to it look like, and when will we expect potentially updates on different actions that will be taken?
Question. So we had a meeting yesterday with Forth Valley College, and we did that in partnership with SDS. So that's looking, so we are a culture now in Falkirk Council where we share our data with those who we work with. So the data is known across all of our schools, so all schools see all schools data. So the timescales for that would be, as it says in the, well, as I said to you when I was narrating the report, we gather information every term. So we ask schools for predictive data every term. We interrogate that and feed back to them, and then we decide what our quality assurance conversations are going to be with schools around about that information, and then what we're going to target in terms of core attainment, vocational qualifications, SCQF, breadth and positive destinations. We also have that data, as I said, that we feed back to them on what we learn from the hub about what the positive destinations have been for those who are still not known, how we're tracking all of that. So there's not really a specific set of timescales, Councillor. It's an ongoing evaluative process all of the time, but we do have that termly lift of predictive data that gives us a really good indication of where children are at. We're also, as you'll remember from September's paper, working through our stretch aims, which were set in August for this session and are due to be evaluated in June 2023. And that again takes in the senior phase. And some of the measures within these stretch aims include destinations and qualifications. So we're currently evaluating the impact of these. We know the progress towards them, and we're pretty sure that we're going to attain most of our stretch aim targets by June 2023. So that the partnership approach is taken on an ongoing way. We are working very closely with Forth Valley College to look at the choices young people are making, their sustaining of those programmes and qualifications, and the pass rates at the end of them.
Thank you. No more questions, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Declan.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Who's our virtual comparators?
Now, I can find out the big long list of who they are for you, and I'll send that to you so you know who they are from all 32 local authorities. But basically, as it says in the report, they are schools within other authorities who have similar demographics, so who've got the same levels of additional support needs, who've got the same levels of social demographics, maybe the same levels of deprivation or affluence in their communities, and who sit similarly to the schools in Falkirk. So we'll have schools like that in every other local authority. So I'll be able to send you, because I don't know off the top of my head and there's lots of them, but I'll be able to send you the list of schools that we are compared to. Okay.
Second question, I was looking at the graphs for level 4 and level 5 numeracy and literacy. How is Falkirk's performance for these considerably higher than other comparators, and what can we do to ensure that this continues?
Good question. That is a good question. I think because of the things that I've talked about, Declan, in terms of the relationship that the central team have with our schools, and the literacy and numeracy in Falkirk has been a core priority for us since 2017. We've been very clear with our schools that any additional funding from People Equity funding has to be targeted to literacy, numeracy, health and wellbeing, that it can be. These are core priorities for us, and we want to see that the money is used to improve those outcomes for young people. We are holding people to account because as part of the Scottish curriculum, there is a responsibility of all. That means that all members of staff in every school, including secondaries, are responsible for seeing the attainment and improvement of literacy across the curriculum. So every subject area, staff should be looking to see in their subject area, how can they make sure that that's meeting the criteria for good literacy and good numeracy across the curriculum. So I suppose that combined focus over a period of time is helping us to make sure that we've got our eye on the ball, and that if we notice things are beginning to change, or we're in that predictive data that we get, we're seeing things that maybe aren't predicted to be as good as they should be, or we think they could be, we have conversations about that and we work with our schools to see, right, what's happening. And hopefully as a young person you've experienced that if you were ever having a wobble, that you had something that helped you to get extra study support or a bit of extra support from your house leader or your guidance teacher to make sure that you had that support to get you back on track if you ever wavered off. So it's a combination of lots of things, but we are confident that we can keep it going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Declan. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to say thank you to Rona and all the staff that she works with for this comprehensive collection of data and analysis of data. I recognise what a large job it is. And I'd also like to kind of say I think we have to thank all the teachers as well, who have obviously contributed to giving you the data, and who've also under the situation in the last 2 or 3 years have managed to ensure that our young people do have that level of attainment, and to the young people who themselves have overcome the difficulties to have that level of attainment. So a very major thank you. You mentioned at the end, when you'd completed your summary of the report, about concern about the anxiety that some young people have of their continuing situation because of the problems of COVID. And obviously we are all very concerned about that and hope that you'll be able to continue to ensure that there is the necessary support there. What I would say though is that I've actually been quite encouraged when I've been in schools talking to young people and going to shows and the other things that the schools do. I have been really encouraged by the ability that teachers and pupils have shown to overcome those difficulties. And I think we need to hope that that's going to continue. You mentioned looking at young people's whether they've continued in university and whether there has been a bigger dropout problem. And it's one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about, and I don't know how you do it or if it's feasible to do it, but whether there are ways in which you can look at some of the young people's destinations a year later, 2 years later, because it's not just about what young people do as they leave school, it's also about are they then able to sustain it. And I'm well aware, having had my own difficulties at university after first year, that a lot of young people do have a problem at that stage. The same thing happens with college courses. The same thing happens with employment, where the employment people have gone into isn't exactly what they thought it would be. Do you have plans for trying to collect a bit more of that information, and will we be able to get that reported to the executive?
We are, Councillor Hannah, trying to see that longer term picture. I think, as we said to you in September, we fully expect to be evaluating the impact of the pandemic in 2025. I think, as all services are finding, that the ramifications of what's happened to families and communities is going to be borne out over a number of years. And our self-evaluation commitment is part of that. So we're no longer just looking at snapshots of the first year that children leave school. We're looking to see what's happened beyond that. We're feeding back to our primary schools where their cohorts of primary 7s ended up. So they're interested to see when they left them in primary 7, where did they leave primary S6 and go to. So we're certainly looking beyond first year if it's university. As said, we are looking at supporting young people when they go to college and those shared placements, because you know we have a number of young people who do studies at school, but they also do some studies at Forth Valley College. So we're looking to see how we can support them even better. We're looking across the system at the mentoring process. And as you say, there are a number of young people who have continued to excel and do very well. There are young people who are anxious. So just recently, all of our secondary schools have worked on, I think it depends what they've called them, but they're around about exam anxiety workshops. So they're trying to help people be really open and honest about how they're feeling around about sitting exams for the first time. And that again is of course children in S6, S5 and S4. There's our health and wellbeing, mental health and wellbeing service, which signposts children of all age groups. And there are a lot of facilities around about the senior phase age groups for the mental health services that are available to them out with school. And we also have our schools counselling programme in primary and secondary. So all of these things are in place and young people are signposted them as they need them. And the mentoring process and tracking and monitoring process in secondary schools for senior phase is really rigorous. So we're hoping that that means that very, very few children arrive at their exams feeling that they've not been supported or have had some things put in place to help them manage that. But all of it is a long-term plan.
Thank you very much and keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Just a quick question on the back of the previous one, Rona. I know that universities and colleges provide information regarding dropout rates for their courses. How do employers factor into this? If a positive destination goes to an employer and they leave that employment for whatever reason, how is that factored in?
We don't routinely get that. We could ask for it. I think that's where we'd work really closely with Skills Development Scotland, and the Employment Training Unit would probably help us with that in trying to get that information. We don't routinely get it, but we can ask for it. Whether individual businesses or employers would share it or not would be a question we would have to ask, but it's not something that we routinely get. We would have to factor that into the work that we're doing now. And I think our work, our ambition really is to work as a service with our employers, our business partners and the college to make sure that as children move through, they don't just have that support to get to their destinations, it's what's happening for them once they're in them, whether that's in employment or whether that's in further education. And we do have our Career Ready programme, which is trying to give children, this young people, the skills to have the ability to go into employment and be great contributors to that business. So there are lots of things in place around about skills and attributes development to give them that resilience and that ability to cope with the working life and university life. But we do, as we said to Councillor Hannah, that needs to be a longer term projection than we've possibly done before, and to take in a bit more data around about employment as well as further education.
Okay, thanks Rhona, thanks Convener.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mr Chalmers.
Hi, just wanted to bring up the fact of saying how well our young people have done in all of this data, but also just to say how hard the teachers and everybody in the schools have been working round about to actually make this possible as well. And what is becoming even tighter budgets in schools must commend how well we continue to churn out these results. I know there's been a dip in some of them, but I still say that teachers and things, and just to bring up that point, I know a few other people have mentioned that as well, but it is schools, teachers, support staff and everybody are working extremely hard in the schools to obviously make this possible for our young people to hopefully get the best destination they can going forward. So just wanted to bring that point to the table as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chalmers. That's a point well made, that education is not a single input. It's a collaboration, and it's a collaboration of all the school family, not just the teachers within the schools, but the support staff and others as well that do some of that social support as well. So it's a point well made that everybody has been doing a huge amount of work, particularly on the back of the challenging time around the pandemic. So thank you for that. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Murtagh just to briefly wind up.
Thanks, and I would absolutely associate myself with those remarks Mr Chalmers has just made, and yourself, Convener. It is a whole school family approach, a whole education approach, and it takes everybody working together, and I know that there's that commitment to continue to do so. I think just one point that maybe hasn't been picked up so much from what was said by Rhona in her report, also, although it's so essential, we all know the value and the importance of teachers being able to deliver, quality teaching, and that being their focus within the classroom to get the best for our pupils. But the tracking and monitoring really is key in terms of understanding right from the beginning of our child's life and journey in education, right the way through, no matter what changes, and God forbid we ever have another pandemic, but the circumstances, that these things, the expectations and the tracking and monitoring journey of our children is something that we have invested time and resource in order that we can put in supports, not just at a last moment or on a chance of picking something up. They're critical, and I think sometimes they don't get enough focus because it's I'm not going to say more fashionable to focus on that immediate delivery, which is of course just critically important. But I think the work that central teams do and the understanding that the collection of data that the teachers are able to provide through that monitoring process going through schools and school journey is really important to make sure we continue to get those positive destinations and we can invest the resources where they need to be targeted most. So absolutely, I'd agree. It's a whole family approach, and I know that collectively we'll all put our best endeavours to that wheel. So my thanks again to all involved in the system to get these results. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we agree the report? Okay, thank you, everyone. Can I just thank everybody for their attendance this morning. It's been a good committee and good meeting. Particularly thank you to Declan for your very relevant and pertinent questions. So we'll look forward to more of that coming forward. But I hope you now have nice rest of the day, and we've just managed to squeeze it in before 1 o'clock, so folks will manage to get lunch. Thanks very